Seoul, South Korea, a city alive with neon lights, buzzing markets, and the hum of modern progress. On the surface, it was safe, thriving, untouchable. Families bustled through the streets, couples filled late-night cafes, and elders enjoyed the comfort of wealth in quiet homes. But under the glow of skyscrapers, a nightmare was walking among them, a nightmare wearing an ordinary face and a raincoat. His name was Yoo Young-chul, but soon the world would know him as the Raincoat Killer. The terror began quietly in 2003 in the upscale neighborhoods of Seoul, where life seemed untouchable. The first bodies appeared. Elderly couples, pillars of stability, found bludgeoned to death inside their own homes. The crime scenes were brutal. Broken doors, pools of blood staining once pristine living rooms, jewelry and cash ripped away. At first, detectives whispered about burglary, but something didn't fit. The violence wasn't quick or clean. It was rage. Faces smashed beyond recognition, bones shattered with savage precision. Whoever this was didn't just want money, he wanted destruction, and the people of Seoul could feel it. The city began to change. Wealthy families triple-locked their doors. Curtains were drawn earlier. Every creak of the floorboards in the night made hearts race. Neighbors avoided eye contact in hallways, terrified that trust itself could be fatal. Still, the authorities refused to admit the unthinkable. South Korea wasn't supposed to have serial killers. Not here, not now. The idea was too destabilizing. They called the murders isolated incidents. But the truth, a predator had already chosen his hunting ground, and that predator was evolving. Yoo Young-chul wasn't satisfied with simple burglary. The killings gave him something more powerful than money control. Each strike of his hammer was personal. He despised the wealthy, despised the system that left him powerless, despised anyone who represented the life he believed he was denied. In his mind, he was delivering punishment. By summer, the killings grew bolder. Yoo slipped through dark streets like a ghost. Neighbors caught fleeting glimpses. A man walking too calmly at night, carrying a bag that sagged with hidden weight. A raincoat, ordinary yet chilling, shielding him from suspicion and from blood. The fear became unbearable. People whispered his presence in the dark. Parents warned their children never to open the door. Couples flinched at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Seoul was a city alive with motion, but underneath it was paralyzed by dread. And he was only getting started. The police were hunting shadows. They had no face, no clear motive, only a growing trail of bodies that screamed of hatred and cold calculation. Each crime scene felt like a message, written in violence. I am here. You cannot stop me. What no one knew yet, what no one could imagine, was that this was only Act 1 of the horror. Because Yoo Young-chul was about to change his hunting ground, the elderly were only his practice victims. His true obsession, his true darkness, was still waiting to be unleashed. For months, Seoul had lived in quiet fear. Wealthy couples locked away in their apartments, whispering about the faceless phantom breaking into homes and leaving behind pools of blood. Police worked furiously, but every lead turned to smoke. Each crime scene was the same: chaos, brutality, and silence. It was as though the killer could walk through walls and vanish without leaving a trace. But while investigators chased shadows, Yoo Young-chul was changing. The murders of wealthy couples were never his endgame. They were practice, a rehearsal. Each body was a test of his control, his strength, his ability to kill without hesitation. And with each death, his confidence grew. He didn't just feel untouchable, he felt powerful. But deep inside, Yoo carried a different hunger, one that had been simmering in the darkest corners of his mind for years. He didn't just hate the wealthy, he hated women. His marriage had ended in humiliation. His wife had left him. He felt rejected, abandoned, and stripped of dignity. In his mind, women were untrustworthy, corrupt, and undeserving of life. And now, with his newfound taste for violence, Yoo decided to unleash his wrath on them. That was when Seoul's nightmare shifted. No longer breaking into homes of elderly couples, Yoo began haunting the red light districts of the city. He posed as a client, approaching women who worked on the streets, offering money and luring them into his trap. These women were some of society's most vulnerable, ignored by police, abandoned by family, often forced into dangerous choices just to survive. And Yoo knew it. He preyed on that vulnerability, smiling politely as he led them away, disguising the storm of rage boiling inside him. Once alone, the politeness vanished. Yoo would strike suddenly, brutally, his favorite weapon, a blunt hammer, one single strike to the head, cold and efficient, leaving his victims crumpled in silence. He didn't just kill, he desecrated, he mutilated, he disposed of bodies with chilling calculation. But perhaps most disturbing was what he claimed afterward, that he consumed parts of his victims. Whether exaggerated or true, this confession alone was enough to send shivers through South Korea. The monster wasn't just killing, he was crossing into something darker, something primal. By late 2003, women began disappearing. One by one, names vanished from the streets. At first it was brushed aside. In a society that stigmatized sex workers, missing reports were rarely taken seriously. But when the whispers grew louder, when mothers began begging for answers, when friends realized entire clusters of women had vanished, the fear erupted again. The city realized this wasn't random, someone was hunting. Still, Yoo felt invincible. He walked the streets in his raincoat, hammer hidden, eyes scanning like a predator in the wild. Every night he returned to his tiny apartment, cleaning himself of blood, erasing evidence with methodical care. His neighbors thought he was quiet, unremarkable, almost invisible, but behind those walls the reality was unthinkable. Yoo wasn't a man anymore. He was a storm of hatred given flesh, and the killings didn't stop. In fact, they escalated. Reports later confirmed that Yoo was claiming lives at a terrifying pace. It wasn't just murder, it was slaughter, bodies discarded, lives erased, families broken, and still, the police were blind. They didn't even realize the Raincoat Killer they were searching for had already shifted targets. Imagine the dread of those nights in Seoul. Imagine walking home after work, every footstep echoing in the alleyway, every shadow flickering under the streetlight. Women clutched their bags tighter, scanning behind them, afraid of being followed, but no one suspected the quiet man with the raincoat. No one realized the ordinary stranger on the sidewalk was already plotting their end. This was Yoo's genius, and Seoul's tragedy. He was invisible because he looked like everyone else, not a monster hiding in the woods, not a face on a wanted poster, just another man in a city of millions. A predator camouflaged as prey. The investigation lagged. Evidence was scarce. The victims he chose were often dismissed by society, their disappearances blending into the noise of daily life, and Yoo exploited this blind spot mercilessly. Each night he grew bolder, testing how far he could go before the world noticed, and still, no one noticed. By the time authorities realized the scope of what was happening, it was already too late. The Raincoat Killer had claimed dozens of lives. He had transformed from a burglar who bludgeoned the wealthy into one of South Korea's most terrifying serial killers, and in his mind, he was just beginning, because Yoo didn't kill out of desperation. He didn't kill to cover his tracks. He killed because he wanted to, because with every victim, he felt power surge through his veins. With every body, he erased the humiliation of his failed marriage, the bitterness of his poverty, the shame of being rejected. To Yoo Young-chul, killing was no longer survival. It was his identity. It was who he had become. And while Seoul slept uneasily under neon lights, Yoo sharpened his rage and prepared for the next hunt. The city was about to wake up to the truth. There wasn't just a killer on the loose. There was a predator who believed it was his mission to cleanse society. And soon, his arrogance would expose him. By early 2004, Seoul was suffocating under the weight of terror. Elderly couples had been butchered in their own homes. Women from the streets were vanishing without a trace, and rumors spread like wildfire. People whispered his name in fear, the Raincoat Killer. Nobody knew his face. Nobody knew when he would strike next, but everyone felt his presence in the shadows. The city had become a prison of paranoia. Doors were bolted, windows shut tight. Families begged daughters not to go out after dark. The police, under mounting pressure, scrambled to reassure the public. They increased patrols. They promised action. But Yoo Young-chul, methodical, cunning, merciless, slipped through every crack. By now, Yoo had killed at least 20 people, 20 lives erased with the swing of his hammer, 20 families shattered forever. His hunger only grew with each kill, and his arrogance began to swell. He believed he was untouchable, a ghost, a phantom, a monster hidden in plain sight. But arrogance makes mistakes. One night in 2004, Yoo lured another woman into his trap, but this time she fought back. In the chaos, she slipped from his grip and escaped, sprinting into the streets, her cries cutting through the night like sirens. Yoo panicked. For the first time, he felt exposed. That single escape would prove catastrophic for him. The woman went straight to the police. She described her attacker, his mannerisms, his patterns. Suddenly, the faceless phantom had a human outline. Investigators began piecing together what survivors and witnesses had seen. A man in his 30s, ordinary looking, often in a raincoat carrying a hammer or bag. The hunt sharpened. Meanwhile, Yoo's rage deepened. He hated that someone had survived. To him, survival meant weakness, and weakness meant disrespect. His killings grew sloppier, more erratic. The methodical predator was unraveling, and that unraveling gave police their first real opportunities. Detectives pulled phone records. They canvassed red light districts. They combed through hours of CCTV footage. Slowly, a pattern emerged. A man returning again and again to certain streets, often late at night. His movements were careful, but not careful enough. Then in July 2004, Yoo made his fatal mistake. He approached another woman, planning to lure her as he had so many others. But undercover officers were nearby. They had been monitoring the area, waiting for their phantom to reappear. Yoo approached, unaware he was walking straight into the trap. The takedown was fast and brutal. Officers swarmed him, dragging him to the ground, his raincoat crumpling under the weight of their grip. Yoo thrashed, cursed, but there was no escape. The ghost had been caught. The monster in the raincoat was finally in chains. News spread like wildfire. South Korea exhaled, relief mixing with horror. People crowded outside police stations, desperate to see the face of the man who had stolen their safety. When his face was revealed, shock rippled through the nation. He wasn't a towering figure, not a monster from nightmares. He was ordinary, almost forgettable, just another face in the crowd, and that was the most chilling revelation of all, that someone so average-looking, so unremarkable, could carry such evil inside. But the real horror was yet to come. Inside the interrogation room, Yoo didn't flinch, he didn't beg, he didn't deny. He confessed, coldly, casually, almost as if he were talking about the weather. He told investigators about the elderly couples, about the women, about his hammer, about the nights he prowled Seoul, hunting for prey, and then came the detail that froze even the most hardened detectives. Yoo claimed he had eaten parts of his victims. He spoke of livers, cooked and consumed, as if he were describing a normal meal. Whether the confession was truth or twisted exaggeration hardly mattered. The damage was done. The image of the Raincoat Killer wasn't just of a murderer, it was of a cannibal, a monster who had gone beyond killing, into something unspeakable. Investigators pressed him on his motives. Why the elderly? Why the women? Yoo's answers were filled with venom. He said he despised the wealthy, resented their comfort while he rotted in poverty. He said women were liars, untrustworthy, deserving of death. To him, killing wasn't just violence, it was punishment. The public reeled. This wasn't a crime spree. This was ideology. This was hatred weaponized into slaughter. Seoul stared into the eyes of Yoo Young-chul and saw not a man, but a void filled with rage, bitterness, and unrepentant cruelty. Still, the case wasn't finished. Detectives needed proof, evidence strong enough to stand in court. Yoo led them to crime scenes, to burial sites, to fragments of lives he had discarded like trash. Bones were unearthed, personal items were recovered, families were given grim closure they never asked for, and with each revelation, the legend of the Raincoat Killer grew darker. By the end of July 2004, the evidence was undeniable. Yoo Young-chul had killed at least 20 people. Some say the true number was higher, hidden in places never found. He had mutilated, he had desecrated, he had confessed without remorse. For the first time in months, Seoul began to breathe again. The city was safe, the phantom was behind bars, but the sense of victory was muted by the scale of the horror. The relief of capture couldn't erase the memories of blood-soaked apartments, missing daughters and lives shattered forever. And as Yoo sat in his cell, waiting for judgment, he smiled, not with fear, not with regret, but with arrogance. He believed his name would be remembered. He believed he was larger than life. In a twisted way, he was right. The Raincoat Killer had been unmasked, but his story wasn't over, because now came the trial, now came the reckoning. When Yoo Young-chul was dragged into court, the world finally saw the man who had haunted Seoul streets. Cameras flashed, journalists jostled for space, families of victims clutched photographs of loved ones, their faces etched with grief and rage. And Yoo, he walked in calmly, almost smug, his head held high as if this were his stage. This was the man who had bludgeoned elderly couples, who had lured women into his trap, who had confessed to cannibalism with a chilling lack of remorse. And now, he would face judgment. The trial was a spectacle unlike anything South Korea had seen in years. Every seat was filled. Every word was reported. People crowded around televisions, radios, and newspapers, desperate to hear how justice would be served. But inside the courtroom, Yoo treated the proceedings like a game. He smirked as evidence was presented. He spoke coldly about his victims, referring to them as if they weren't people at all, but objects. He even taunted the court, saying that if he were released, he would kill again. The arrogance was unbearable. To the public, it was proof that Yoo wasn't just guilty, he was irredeemable. Prosecutors laid out the horror in detail. The elderly couples bludgeoned in their own homes, the women lured, beaten, and discarded. The claims of cannibalism, the sheer scale of his hatred. They painted a picture of a man driven not by desperation, but by ideology, his belief that the wealthy deserved punishment, his belief that women were liars who deserved death. The defense had little to offer. Some argued for mental illness, but Yoo himself destroyed that angle. He was too calm, too calculated. His killings weren't the chaos of a broken mind, they were the precision of a predator. As the trial dragged on, emotions boiled over, families wept openly. Survivors spoke of their terror. The nation's anger grew louder each day. People demanded the harshest penalty possible. Yoo had shattered their sense of safety, their trust in ordinary life. Nothing less than the ultimate punishment would satisfy the wound he had carved into the nation's heart. Finally, in December 2004, the verdict came down. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. Yoo Young-chul was sentenced to death. For a moment there was silence. Then came the cries, tears of grief, tears of relief. Families clutched one another, knowing that justice, however incomplete, had been delivered. Yoo would never walk free again, but even in that moment, the killer refused to surrender. He smirked, he mocked, he declared that he deserved the sentence, but only because he believed death was better than life in a cage. His lack of remorse left scars as deep as his crimes. The Raincoat Killer was condemned, but his shadow lingered. South Korea reeled. The case forced a nation to confront what it had long denied. Serial killers could exist here, just as they did elsewhere. The illusion of safety had been shattered. Parents spoke in hushed tones about Yoo's crimes, warning their children to stay vigilant. Entire neighborhoods were haunted by the memory of blood spilled in quiet apartments and alleyways. The media dissected every detail of his life, searching for explanations. His poverty, his failed marriage, his bitterness. But no answer felt sufficient. How could one man carry so much hatred, so much cruelty, inside an ordinary frame? In prison, Yoo remained cold and unrepentant. He gave interviews, sometimes speaking casually about his crimes, as though he were describing chores. He wanted to be remembered, and in a way, he got his wish. To this day, his name is etched into South Korea's darkest history. But the true legacy wasn't his name, it was the pain he left behind. Families who never recovered. Survivors who never forgot the sound of his footsteps or the swing of his hammer. A city that would never again believe it was immune to monsters. The Raincoat Killer left behind more than bodies. He left behind a nation forever changed. Seoul, once vibrant and carefree at night, carried new shadows. Conversations about safety, policing, and justice grew louder. The case forced the country to look directly into the eyes of evil and admit that sometimes evil looks ordinary. Perhaps that was the most terrifying truth of all. Yoo Young-chul wasn't a demon in the woods. He wasn't a mythical beast. He was a man in a raincoat, walking through crowded streets, smiling politely as he searched for his next victim. He blended in so perfectly that no one suspected, until it was far too late. The story of the Raincoat Killer isn't just about the man himself. It's about the fragility of safety, the thin line between normal life and nightmare, the reminder that darkness doesn't always hide. It sometimes walks beside us in plain sight. Today, Yoo Young-chul remains on death row. South Korea hasn't carried out an execution since 1997, which means he sits in limbo, alive but caged, his death sentence suspended indefinitely. He waits in silence, a monster denied the spotlight he once craved, trapped in a cell that echoes with the ghosts of his victims. But for the people of Seoul, the sentence was clear long ago. In their hearts, the Raincoat Killer is already gone, erased by the weight of his sins. What remains is the memory, a reminder of the nights when fear ruled the city, when safety was shattered, and when one man's hatred left scars across an entire nation. And that memory, more than his crimes, is why his name still chills the blood. The Raincoat Killer was caught, the Raincoat Killer was condemned, but the Raincoat Killer will never be forgotten.